All right, we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first masterclass of the week here at the Scotch, Malt, Whiskey Society of America. Good to see all of you joining us. We got a full group tonight, so welcome. Let me do a quick little roll call real quick, and we'll get set up and get ready to go. So real quick, I've been catching up in the comments as we're getting ready to start. I just want to say hi to everybody. D Lane, I think you were the first one in, so good to see you. Karen was here. Good to see you, Karen. Pamela said, "Oh dear, it looks like Pamela was getting an early start and had a few drams poured, waiting a couple hours." So Pamela, hope you're back. Welcome. Well, got a lot of people here. I don't have time to go through everyone, but I just want to acknowledge those who have commented. George, hello from sunny and warm Los Angeles County. As you can tell, I'm here at home. And for everybody watching live, you know we're amongst these pretty bizarre times right now. If you're watching the replay, we're in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic, and I am not neither in my office with a bunch of whiskey behind me or at the vaults in Scotland. This is my living room, and I'm currently setting up shop for my kitchen table. But here in Chicago, it's snowing today, so hello from LA, indeed. Joshua Case is here. Good to see you, Joshua. Dram session. Asked, are you selling SMWS Copitas? You know, funny, we'll be tasting a few whiskeys tonight. And actually, we offered a set of those glasses, at no additional charge with each bottle. Excuse me, actually with each set. So I think we'll be tasting through some of those. I actually don't have them with me today. Because I'm at home, I have some regular ones. But the Whiskey Objective is here. Dram session. Good to see you. Okay, so I'll be tonight. I'm on my own hosting this, what's called a masterclass, and I'll be checking the comments, and I'll be doing my best. And trust me to address all questions and feedback. But because I am a one-man show, I might be a little off here and there. And we, of course, have a full agenda. So tonight is, as I mentioned, the first masterclass that we're hosting this week here at the Scotch, Malt, Whiskey Society of America. And, you know, it's funny, the word masterclass, we use that word, and I feel a little awkward, as the host of the masterclass using that term, because in a way, as a whiskey enthusiast and appreciator of all whiskey and really all spirits, I always believe we're always learning more and more. And so I'm here today to share what I know and offer as much insight as I can with these three whiskeys we'll be tasting tonight. Do I consider myself a master? Absolutely not. Am I learning every day still? Yes, of course. And so anyway, I just want to call that out before we get started, because I was getting ready and thinking, man, this is a master class. There was this pressure building up. But I think those of you who know me will know it'll be pretty casual. So what we're doing is, and the reason we're doing this, first of all, I know a lot of you tuned in over the last couple of weeks with my friend Jenna and I. We started doing what's called the virtual vaults, more of just a casual hangout with society members, and really open to everybody else, as is tonight. And over the last couple of weeks, we had a chance. We did a preview tasting for our April outturn release, a more casual chat this last Friday. And so we want to sort of structure these live streams a little differently and switch things up. And this is going to be, sorry, I got distracted by the comment. Scotch Test Dummy says clickbait. Yes, you're right. This is a master class as it's going to be, but you can determine if I'm a real master at the end. But anyway, back to it. This is going to be tough with the comments flying in and the agenda. There's a lot going on, but back to it. The society, obviously we're unable to really leave our homes. And if you're not leaving your home, I think, good on you. It's really the right thing for us to do right now. But of course, at the society, we're really used to hosting in-person tasting events around the country. Being unable to do that has been tough, because we love nothing more than sharing drams with our fellow members in person. And so we're doing these virtual tastings as a way to really connect. But, it's tough sometimes when we're tasting whiskeys that others are not, who are watching. And so this is a first attempt at really doing a guided tasting with society members who have ordered in advance the three whiskeys that we'll be tasting tonight. So tonight we're starting off with our Coastal Series Masterclass, which will feature what we called our Coastal Corian bundle. Tomorrow will be our Highland selection, and on Friday we'll skip Thursday because I know that's a popular day here in the Whiskey Tube community for other streams. We'll skip Thursday, and then on Friday we'll be doing a Speyside Masterclass featuring three whiskeys from Speyside. So the reason we're doing this, and we announced when we released our outturn this month, members had a chance to order these in advance, and hopefully, and I should ask this, comment below if you guys have these whiskeys in front of you. I don't know that everybody does here, just knowing how many we released, but we did offer these in the outturn in advance for the purpose of tasting along together. So this is kind of the first dry run of that, and I hope it goes well. I hope you guys enjoy this. What we'll be doing, I think, for the format is we have 3 whiskeys, and as I said, these 3 whiskeys are focused on the Scottish coastline, 3 different distilleries, and actually 3 different regions of Scotland, but really sort of all situated on the coast. And it'll be interesting, and I can't promise what the result will be, but it'll be interesting to see sort of how these flavors and aromas coming from these whiskeys are actually attributed to the coast, or perhaps they're not at all. But either way, this bundle, the coastal selection, is really made up of whiskeys from the Scottish coast. And so I think it's funny when you go to a whiskey tasting, oftentimes you'll start with sort of the more approachable, lighter Speyside or Highland whiskeys, and then as you progress, you build up into sort of the coastal and more robust and bold whiskeys. We're kind of just jumping right in, so it'll be interesting. So what we'll do is let's get to it. I should mention too here. So I'll show you. I've listed actually in the description below the 3 whiskeys, and that's actually the order we'll be tasting in. We'll be starting here with Cask 26.132, which is called Krupnik and Amaretti. Right there, 9-year-old Highland whiskey, and we'll get back to that shortly. And then we'll be moving on to Kintyre Peninsula with 93.120 cocoa and coal. Can you guys see that? The inversion is sometimes throws me off on my end, but 93.120 cocoa and coal, 14-year-old Camel Town whiskey. And then, of course, it would not be a coastal tasting with a drop from the island of Islay. This will be Cask 53.310, called Kippers and Slippers, 10-year-old. Again, I know the descriptions are on the bottom. I just want to show the bottles when I can. So real quick, let me just check in. We'll get started in a second. What I'm going to do, if you're welcome to pre-pour all 3, for those of you who do have the whiskeys at home, we'll be starting in the order I just described. But sometimes what I'd like to do, and I guess we'll just start into it. Sometimes what I'd like to do, if I have a smoky whiskey, which, spoiler alert, number 3 really is, if you haven't opened it and been able to tell already, sometimes if you actually pre-pour a smoky whiskey with non-smoky whiskeys, the aromas are so strong that they can actually mask the aromas of the other whiskeys. So what I like to do is I pre-pour the whiskeys that are not smoky or peated, as it's called, and then do that one at the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-pour the first 2 and just let them breathe. And let me take a moment as you guys do that. Just curious to catch up on the comments here real quick. And sorry, there's a lot going on. Scotch Tessemi, it's good to see you. I'm presuming it's Scott. Whiskey Untitled is here. Let's see. Let's Drink Whiskey says, we appreciate the humility, but I've enjoyed every bit of content that's been coming out. Cheers. Let's Drink Whiskey. Appreciate that. Water of Life Whiskey is here. Well, all the whiskeys are here. Kevin Dutcher from Minnesota is here. Good to see you. Zach Kemble in the house. Hello, with a bunch of O's, he says. What's a trillion hello? Whiskey Jason is here. Whiskey A Go Girl, of course. Jenna, who who's been doing these with me and has left me, on my own this time. I'm just kidding. It was actually my foolish idea. So let's get into it real quick. What I'd like to do is just an underlying objective of course, taste the whiskeys. And as I mentioned, these whiskeys may or may not be highly indicative of the region in which they came from, or the coastal style. And I think that's interesting, because a lot of times when we talk about Scotch whiskey in the regions, we tend to think that the borders are so black and white, and that flavor is so closely tied to the region in which the distillery operates. And I've just found that, just from my experience, it's not always clear cut as it is maybe more so for wine, in which there's some legal boundaries that really pertain to actually the production of the wine itself. With whiskey, I find that regional influence is sort of an open book. There's some classical styles, and I mean, perhaps today we'll have some that do really represent the region in which it's from very well, but there are others that really sort of blur the lines. And, I think with Society whiskey, and we'll take the first one, for instance, 26.132. I won't give anything away before our tasting begins, but, in essence, it will be interesting to see. And I'd like to hear from all you guys if you think this is really indicative of the region or not. Won't give anything away. That's for us to decide. But let's first of all, let's just go with the first one. And so I poured it here, and I'll just kind of walk you guys through. If anything, I'll share my own sort of tasting process. I always say there's no wrong way to drink whiskey, but as just a fellow enthusiast, somebody who's loved whiskeys for years, tasted a lot of whiskeys, I've sort of developed my own maybe subconscious way of doing it. I'll try to articulate that with all you. Take it or leave it for however you like. But after pouring, first of all, we're in the midst of quarantine, and that was a really small pour. I think I have to step up my game a little bit for this masterclass. This is not a casual Tuesday night tasting. This is a official Korean masterclass. So anyway, let's get into it. Pour the first whiskey, and I'll share some observations. And again, please, I just invite you, if you're tasting along, comment below, share your experience along. But right away, first thing I've noticed is just all this sort of odd sediment in the whiskey. It's okay. So it's sort of a kind of a copper, pale gold color, sort of like a Pilsner beer. Color is the first thing, obviously, that one would notice because we use our eyes for the most part, but it's not always relevant to whiskey per se, but simply because a lot of times, nature has a funny way of interacting with the spirit, and the flavors are not necessarily connected with the color. A lot of times when you go buy a whiskey off the shelf, whiskeys are artificially colored. So I still like to look at it knowing that all the society whiskeys are naturally colored, sort of a copper or a pale gold type of color. But I was remarking right away, there's a bit of sediment, and I think that just speaks to the fact that this is really just a rough filtered whiskey, but no chill filtering, nothing else to really deprive the spirit of really its natural essence, which is like this sort of cask woody sediment. But anyway, so first cask of tonight is 26.132, called Krupnik and Amaretti. Does anyone know what Krupnik is? I'll reveal it, but just comment below if you guys know what Krupnik is. I think that's a bit of an oddity. Krupnik and Amaretti, it's a 9-year-old, it says here on the bottle, 9 years old. Highland is the region. So the Highlands being the largest geographic region in terms of, but based on footprint in Scotland. First fill barrel ex-bourbon. So what that tells us is that it was matured entirely for 9 years in a first fill ex-bourbon barrel, which in that case, likely made from American oak, shipped over from a bourbon distiller in the US, sent over to Scotland, and then the spirit here was filled into that cask, matured for 9 years, and that's what we have now. So it's just pure, drawn from a single cask. The alcohol by content, or ABV, is 59.6%. So that's pure cask strength, and I can tell you right now that it's pretty apparent when you're tasting a cask strength whiskey. But so let's just do it quick before we get into it. Man, I'm already excited. So the spirit looks great. You can kind of see right here a thick sort of band on top, just the natural oils from the cask. And that's really the difference. I don't know if you can see it here or not, if that's even clear. But if you're tasting along here, you see this sort of thick band. That's just the natural oils from the cask, which shows really good texture overall. But anyway, cheers, Slangeva. Let's get to the first one. So right away, the way I approach a tasting like this is I really focus on sort of the aromatics first, and simply because the nose is in essence the strongest sensory organ in the body, and it may seem counterintuitive, but when it comes to tasting a spirit or really tasting anything, majority of what we actually taste comes from the nose. So right away, just assessing it, just smelling it, will kind of give you an idea of what it may or may not be. Sometimes the palate will change, but just take a moment and just nose it a little bit. And if you put the glass up to your nose, you'll notice right away for me, like the alcohol just sort of just rushed up my nostrils. But then if you take a moment, take a step back for a second and then go back into it, that harshness is sort of calmed down. It's a bit more mellow. Keep in mind, this is almost 60% ABV, so it's really, really high, really strong. But for me, the rush of alcohol has sort of subsided after I go back, but I don't know, I'm picking up a note of really like raw honey, very creamy vanilla. And kind of as you go back and become more familiar with it and allow that sort of your nose to adjust to the alcohol, there's more of a burnt citrus peel. It becomes more complex beneath all that. Give me a moment. There's like a herbal note, a bit, maybe some clove. Yeah. What do you guys think? What are you picking up overall? Lindsay Freeman says sweet and spicy, warms on the back end. Yeah, the spice for me really picks up. At first, it was all this sort of burnt honey, and then the spice comes in. Kevin Dutcher says, yes, so much vanilla on the nose. You know, when it comes to tasting or nosing whiskey, we all have our own palates, and what you taste is different from what I taste. A lot of it's based on sort of sensory memory and other prior experiences. But in essence, you know, we know this cask was 9 years old in a first fill bourbon barrel. A lot of times in that type of wood, we do get a lot of those notes of vanilla and caramel and a bit of citrus, really core characteristics of really bourbon, which was the spirit that was aged in this cask before this one. So Alpe says more citrus is coming up. Yeah, for me, the citrus wasn't there at first. It's coming gently. Alec Rogerson says lemon pepper sounds like Lafroig or Lagavulin. Ah, interesting. Yeah, so we know. We'll rule those out. And you know, at the society, we have an interesting habit. We don't actually reveal the name of the distillery. You know, on the bottle, we have our distillery code and cask code system, and our sort of clever little name used to describe the tasting experience. We don't reveal the distillery, and simply because, well, essentially two reasons. One, no two casks are ever alike. So these are all whiskeys drawn from single casks, and nature has a funny way of being unpredictable. So a lot of times these whiskeys we'll be tasting are very different from maybe what the distilleries are putting out as their core offerings. And the other reason I think at this point is, you know, not all distilleries are open to letting go of single casks to third parties. And so by not putting the name of the distillery, we've been allowed to bottle some whiskey, some amazing whiskey from distilleries that are typically not open to letting others do that. Some members of the society get to really enjoy some fantastic spirit in its purest form. But so, yeah, George Peter says, just got a whiff of salty sour. You know, it's funny. As I'm going back, there's a note, like a little faint hint of salinity in the back. Kevin Dutcher says spicy, almost packs a similar spicy punch as a rye. Interesting, yeah. Rye, you know, the American style whiskey is known as being pretty spicy. And in bourbon, high rye content bourbons are the spicier ones. I should mention too that, you know, each whiskey bottled by the society has its own flavor profile. It's one of 12 essentially proprietary flavor profiles. This one here being the purple label. It says on our website, doesn't say on the bottle, but it's what we call the spicy and sweet flavor profile. So I'm seeing some comments based on your own impressions that it is spicy. There's a bit of sweetness for it too. Salty lemon sour. Interesting. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and taste this one. First of all, I'm gonna take a sip of water because I've been talking and my mouth is so dry. And I actually like to do that before I taste cask strength whiskey, is to just wet the palate. Because what we're about to taste is, I'm gonna taste this one close to 60%. So oh, okay. First of all, I'm still not used to the whole tasting on camera thing. I feel like my reactions are probably pretty awkward, but oh man, that's immediately intense. It's like, it's a rush of alcohol sort of attacking the tongue. And then when you sit with it a little bit, oh, it's a wild bit of milk chocolate. Like that's what I'm getting. I'm getting some more sweet, sort of stewed berried fruits. Oh yeah, the spices are very prevalent, and almost like a bitter. Now I'm sort of in the finish, almost like a bitter note. But wow, it's interesting a lot. I would say for me, well, I want to open up to you guys too, and please. Lindsay says I get pineapple on the nose too. Going backwards here. Gilbert says somewhat briny. Yeah, I do pick up a little bit of that brine, but for me, I get more. Personally, I'm picking up a lot of fruit and a lot of spice. Benjamin Dutcher says I get hints of ripe green apple. Oh yeah, so the orchard fruit, like a ripe green apple. It's like not sour for me, but it's definitely crisp. I'm picking up some of that. Alpe says alcohol does show in the palate, waxy, oily, candied fruits. Yeah, there is a waxy quality to it, isn't there? Oh, but it's intense too. Let's Drink Whiskey says, wait, LOL, is whiskey a go-girl and Jenna one and the same? I'll leave that to her to answer, but I believe they are. Lindsay Freeman says, my husband is here too and mentioned tasting berry preserves as well. The berry note for me, I didn't get it so much on the nose, but when I tasted it, I'm going to taste it one more time neat. Oh, yeah. It's always funny when you taste cask strength whiskey that and maybe my palate's just adjusting. The first time it was so intense. It was, for me, all alcohol. It was just a rush. But after the first tasting it, and I've gone back, I feel a bit climatized. It's more palatable. Still really, really strong. And so this is the time what I like to do is essentially take the glass. This is, by the way, just a standard Copita nosing glass. Any sort of bulb-shaped glass is usually good for the job, but take the glass, take a little jug or water bottle or a dropper, whatever you have, add a little bit of water. Can you see that? It's hard to see with the reflection, but I added just a little bit of water, maybe 10% of what's in the glass here now is water. Well, actually, the whiskey is at a pretty high, 40% water, just about. And so now it's maybe even out to about 50-50, let's just say. Or maybe that math doesn't add up. This is not a mathematics masterclass. It's a whiskey tasting class. Anyway, that away, just adding that water immediately cuts down the harshness. And that, for me, it brings out more of the orchard fruits. I'm curious, if you guys added water, do you think it changes? For me, it changes pretty significantly. And it's not nearly as tart. Yeah, I feel like we've gone down to now sort of civilian level, which is a bit more palatable and not as crazy. 59.6%? Yeah. So, well, I think that does it. Some maybe prefer it neat. Some may prefer it with a bit of water. What I'll do too here is, you saw how much I added. I'll add a little bit more. Yeah. Let's just take it down. I know when a lot of master blenders will actually create a blend, they will really proof down the cask really, really low, cutting down the alcohol and really just focusing on the flavors, which, it's kind of funny because alcohol tends to mask just aromatics and unique flavors. And so cutting it down is really helpful. And of course, it's so much more subtle now with more water. But I'm able to, I find it's easier to pick out the specific notes a bit more. And, again, what I'm picking up is maybe different from what you're picking up, but that just sort of softens the spirit and it's much more palatable. Jim Emily says, math is hard before cask strength. I don't think it's easier after cask strength either. Alpe says, drop of water made it sweeter, more candied fruit, but still lemon, pepper, and salt on the nose. Yeah, it's interesting that the saltiness is there, and it is. I feel like it's more prevalent actually for me with a bit of water. George Preacher says, with water, a little chocolate is on the nose. Whiskey Go Girl says, I love the tartness on this waxy tarty, and I'm getting a little charred love in here. I'm about it. Yeah. So I think this kind of brings to the point now. This is the Coastal series, Coastal Coorie and Masterclass, and Distillery 26, which is from which this cask was brought in, is a Highland distillery situated really on the northeastern coast of Scotland. A lot of times when we think of coastal whiskey, we think of the southwest of Scotland, and we're going there next. So not to get ahead of ourselves, but they think of the islands out there. But really, when you look at Scotland on a map, it's just coastline everywhere. And so the Northern Highlands it's not a region that we typically think of when we think of coastal whiskey, but this is in fact one of them. And I think I'll pose the question before we move on. Is this one, are you picking up the sort of coastal influence? And specifically what I mean by that is, when it comes to making whiskey in Scotland, well, really kind of anywhere, there's always the potential for this distillery's own sort of geological makeup, or that is sort of the earth and atmosphere around it, to impact the actual flavor of the spirit. Sometimes it's very prevalent. I think for some today, it might be more so than this one. Others, it's more subtle. So I'll offer my opinion. I think when we think of coast, we think of the sea, and that's really the key driver here. We think of sort of salty air, sea foam, or like a sea breeze characteristic. There are a lot of smoky whiskeys that we'll get into that are sort of originate from that. But typically, I think of sort of just a big, bold wave of salt, sea foam, a touch of brine. Really, these are the coastal characteristics that we're typically looking for when we think of coastal whiskey. And for this one, I'm curious. Do you guys feel this one? I noticed from initial thoughts a lot of salt, or a little bit of salt here and there, and that's not really going away. That to me does show that, but I find it's very, very subtle. And it could just be me again, but for me, it's a very, very subtle representation of a coastal whiskey. And in a lot of ways, I think that's actually makes for a more approachable whiskey for more. So Alec Rogerson says, I'm drinking my tears because I'm at work. Save me. Well, technically, Alec, I will save you if I can. If you can pour yourself a dram. Lindsay says, brininess is there more after water for sure. Interesting. Yeah. So the water really does bring out new flavors that may have been there at the first taste, but weren't necessarily as prevalent or as dominant. Andrew says tamarind soda, Aritos. Interesting. Yeah. Not as familiar with that. I mean, I know it, I see it, but I typically go for the lime when I'm at my local taco shop. But Alpe says it's a beautiful malt. It is my favorite coastal malt. LOL. Okay. Cheers to that. Lindsay again says, definitely getting a Highland coastal vibe, brine, slight salt air, but the honey quality that a lot of Highland malts have. Yeah, I think it is. It's offering for me the best of both worlds, and sort of the rolling hills of the Highlands, big, sort of fruity, a bit earthy, but a lot of honey and lemon characteristics, and then a bit of salinity. They sort of representing the coastal nature of this whiskey. But Kevin says, shout out to my wife, Libby, who just brought me down a pipette. There you go, Libby. Well done. That's very kind of you. Yeah, and George says, I think many of the Islay distilleries have more of the salt air prominence. This is a very subtle salt influence. Yeah, very different from Islay whiskey, but again, really quite a nice one. Okay, so let's move on. We have three to cover tonight. As I mentioned, 3 different regions. 3 different flavor profiles based on the Scotch Whisky Society's core flavor profiles. And what was I doing? I was about to add water. Sometimes I was just out of habit. When I taste cask strength whiskey, I know the ABV. Sometimes I just add water because I know that's sort of where I'll like to get to eventually. So I just almost added water to this tasting. But okay, so let's move to number 2. This is cask 93.120. It's so bright, I know. Called Cocoa and Coal. So this is a 14-year-old Camel Town whiskey, and we'll touch on Camel Town in a moment. But Camel Town whiskey from a recharred hogshead, distilled on the 31st of January 2005, bottled at 57.3%, and it's one of 277 bottles. I didn't mention the first one too was one of 246. Every label shows the quantity of bottles yielded by the cask, and being that it is all from a single cask, it's entirely unpredictable. They're also very limited because you can only get so much out of one cask, but this is one of 277 bottles. And like that first one, I think my first pour was a little light, so I'm gonna add some more here. And actually adding more whiskey in the glass not only makes this quarantine more bearable, but it also gives me more flexibility when it comes to adding water. It'll be easier to manipulate the ratio of water to whiskey and see how it changes. So, all right. So a bit about this 93.120. As I mentioned, it is from Camel Town, 14 years old, from a recharred hogshead. Camel Town's interesting. Camel Town has become, I would say now, one of the most sought after regions in terms of the whiskeys that we release here at the Society in the U.S. Camel Town has been on everybody's radar these days. I had a chance to go there last year, and really just a fantastic, fantastic experience. Camel Town was once, and correct me if I'm wrong, please. This is the Masterclass, but please correct me if I'm wrong. It was at one time the most prominent region in Scotland in terms of number of distilleries. There were a lot of distilleries operating, and many of them were decimated by the American Prohibition era, sort of like the majority of the Irish whiskey industry in its entirety, which heavily relied on the U.S. market. And so once Prohibition hit here in the U.S., and the Scots could not ship whiskey over to the States. It shut a lot of distilleries out of business. So now there are only 3 distilleries in Camel Town. This is Distillery 93. Had a chance to go to them last year, and it's just a fantastic, fantastic place. It is a small town with just these working distilleries out sort of on a peninsula in the middle of nowhere, just cast off into the sea. Fantastic place, making really high quality spirit. And I think it's really just finally getting the attention it really deserves. So let's get in this one, 93-120 Cocoa and Coal from the sweet, fruity, and mellow flavor profile. The first one was spicy and sweet flavor profile. This is sweet, fruity, and mellow. So see if you can pick that up. So right away, I mean, my first impression is it's a bit floral. I mean, relative to the first one, and I quite like that. It's not a bad thing, but the floral nature of this one is sort of the most prevalent right away, and it's very, very welcoming. Like it sort of just sucks you in. Like it's a very deep, complex spirit. A bit of roasted malt characteristic, a hint of salinity, sort of like the previous one. It's very, very faint. And maybe if you go a little deeper, you tell me, but I get just like a whisper of smoke. Such a gentle wave of it. But wow, overall, very, very complex. Tamar is here. Hello, Tamar. Good to see you. Dram Session is also here. Erwin says, I don't have a 93. However, I just poured a Victoriana. Very nice. Another Camel Town whiskey. Vesper Tiger says, chocolate, pastry, honey, and rose with a bit of smoke. Wow, that is. I like that. Yeah, so I picked up, I said it was a little bit floral, so the rose is definitely there for me. And yeah, and so you've also picked up the smoke. Oh, yeah. Gilbert says, that slight Camel Town funk in the nose. You know, Camel Town whiskey is known for being this sort of very funky. And I use that word with the most respect because I quite enjoy it. But it has this sort of funky coastal characteristic. And for me, this one is very, it's there. It's subtle. It's very, very approachable. Sometimes Camel Town whiskey and some of the island whiskeys overall, Camel Town's it's on a peninsula, but sort of these really coastal whiskeys have a bit of funk to them. It can be a bit unapproachable especially for first-time whiskey drinkers. This one is a bit more approachable. Tamar says, if I could only pick one region of Scotland, it would be Camel Town for sure. Wow, yeah. And only 3 distilleries there too. So I'm going to go ahead and taste this one. It's a bit tart for me. Very fruity. Oh. Whereas the first one, I thought it was like a rush of alcohol right away. And it could be because, oh, okay, never mind. There it is. I got it that time. Right initially, the first whiskey we had was really intense. This is 57.3% versus 59.6%. So not a big difference. Both really, really strong. But it was, for me, immediately more approachable. And then I sort of got this wave. It's a bit tart. As I mentioned, it's fruity. Cocoa and coal, interesting. So I do get some of the cocoa notes. And I'm wondering, I'm sort of going, I'll go back and taste again looking for the coal, but Dram Session says that funk reminds me of rotting vegetation, but in a good way. I know where you're coming from. Whiskey Girl says there is a wee bit of funk on the back end, like an earthy funk. Yeah, I think it's so nice though. It's like a really nice balance between the sweetness and the earthiness of it. Alpe says the stringency wasn't in the finish. Palate didn't feel like too alcohol-y, fruitier and funkier. Yeah, sometimes, I mean, this is 5 years older. Sometimes, age has a funny way of actually mellowing the impact of alcohol. And I think that could be at play here as well. And it's a bit sooty on the finish. Yeah, there's a bit of, I mean, the coal note, and it's funny because the society, when we host our in-person events around the country, for our tasting events, we tend to do these blind, where we'll pour out different samples for members and their friends who attend. And in essence, we will not tell you what they are. And so it's a really good opportunity to go in there and taste things without any expectations. You don't know the region. You're not influenced by anything other than your own experience. And that's essentially how our tasting panel does it over in Edinburgh when they taste our samples and choose what's good enough to be bottled, is they do it in a bit of a blind tasting process. So now that I know that's called cocoa and coal, like I find myself looking for the coal, and I think I found it, but I don't know that I would have, if it weren't called cocoa and coal. Jay Manley says the finish is a dry cocoa. I get the cocoa for sure, and it is dry. I like that. It's not too sweet. Go ahead and add some water. Tamar, the last 3 weeks I've been in a bourbon rut. I need to get back to Scotch again. Well, welcome back, Tom. I go back and forth myself. Malt whiskeys, my preference, and probably 9 out of 10 times I choose to enjoy malt whiskey. But I think branching out and exploring others will not only sort of broaden your own horizons, but also enhance your appreciation for what you do like, such as perhaps malt whiskey. Oh, interesting. Oh, wow. So adding a bit of water for me brought out that cold character that I was looking for. I was struggling to find it at the beginning, but for me now it's getting a bit more earthy. There's that smoke. There's a slight smoke that's become amplified a little bit with the addition of water and cutting down the alcohol. And now to me, this has gone from what may have been mistaken, if you were to taste it blind, as a whiskey from sort of Speyside, where the fruitiness, the orchard fruit and honey and vanilla is really the sort of the dominant factors, or rather the dominant flavors that you pick up from the whiskey. And now with a little bit of water, it's brought out that smoky note. It's become more of a whiskey that I would attribute to the coast of Scotland. In this case, it's the West Coast. Oh, I'd add just a drop of water, and then it becomes for me a lot more complex. Alpe says water brought out the funkiness out on the nose. I think that's probably what I'm experiencing too. A double pipette brought out more of the cask. Char plus subtle bourbon. So yeah, so this is and on the char note, this is a recharred hogshead. Hogshead is, I think, between a hogshead and barrel, those are the two most popular types of casks used for whiskey maturation in Scotland today. I mean, if you were to count up all the casks, millions, I would presume, the majority would be a hogshead, which is essentially a larger cask, slightly larger than a barrel. And when you increase the cask size, you're effectively decreasing the ratio of wood to spirit. Think of it this way: the smaller the cask, the greater the intensity of the wood interaction. So when you go to a slightly larger cask, you have a bit more flexibility in terms of time. And when if you ever buy those really small casks that are, say, this big, maybe a liter, or even half a liter, and you can do a sort of a home aging kit. They sell those. I don't know. I get targeted with those ads all the time because I always look at whiskey content online. But if you do those and you put something in there for a few weeks, it'll really sort of develop, take on the characteristics of the cask. This is a hogshead, so slightly larger, the more common type that you'll find in Scotland. I think, on reference, roughly three bourbon barrels. If you break them down into staves, you can make about 2 hogsheads roughly from the stave. So in terms of size, it's a bit larger. This has been recharred, which means that after the cask has been used, likely 2, maybe 3 times, the inner linings have been recharred, reinvigorating the natural cask sugars, which will then play an effect into the sort of influence of the spirit. So a bit more aggressive, I would say, of an influence, and maybe you pick that up. The coal note is there for me now. It's like a dry ash beneath that sort of fruity characteristic that I picked up right away. Vesper, I love the name Vesper. Vesper says, funny water for me made it sweeter and fruitier. I might have overpoured on the water though. It's possible. I mean, I poured a little bit, but what you're experiencing could be different from what I'm experiencing, just because we're just different. We have different palates. Alpe says, palate is sweet now, and cocoa and coal is coming. Interesting finish becomes drier, ashier. Yeah, I get the ashiness. It's like a cold ash for me. So this to me is becoming a bit more indicative of the Camel Town style of whiskey, which is coastal. It has a bit of funk. If you were to assign a temperature, I would say it's colder. Cold, not cold like COLA. There's more coal. It's coalier, and it's colder than sort of the warming, sort of fruity characteristics This to me, it's becoming more of a chilly afternoon or evening. Actually, it's snowing here, but as I think I mentioned earlier, it's snowing here, and so a good dram for this type of weather. So cheers. Oh, yeah, really complex whiskey. I mean, a lot going on. I think it's one that I'll be going back. I did open these bottles. I should mention too, if everybody tasting along, I did open these bottles. As you can see here, there's lines about there. I've had a few drams from this from past 2 weeks. I did a virtual tasting with the Saratoga Whiskey Club in New York, and some of these we went through. But my point is that, you know, if you're just pouring the first pour from your bottles right now, sometimes the neck pour, as they call it, or any of the first few pours from a cask strength bottle can be really, really intense. And I find that having some time to breathe, maybe a few days, maybe a week, just in the bottle like this. I mean, if you can see, I don't know if this shows up, just allowing this much to breathe over the course of a week, I think really does the whiskey some favors in terms of the overall, you know, your quality of the experience of tasting it. And so I think this one, I'm going off of memory, it's so much more enjoyable and so much more developed than it was. So if you're finding it's really intense, really compact, and really alcoholic, I'd say maybe give it some time. Give it a few days, give it a week, and go revisit and see how it changes for you. So Kevin says, I like the nose and palate better with water, but it loses something in the finish. It definitely, for me, it loses some intensity. And the texture obviously is cut down with the water, for me at least. Vesper says, like a vanilla creme brulee with some berries. Oh, I like that as well. Yeah, and it's funny, I was looking for the coal, and I was like, I don't know about this cocoa and coal name. And now I can't stop smelling the coal everywhere. I feel my mouth is covered with dry ash here with water. Very interesting. I think interesting is a good way to describe it. Scotch Test Dummy. Scott says, not much left. Their website only has a few bottles. You know, yeah, hashtag sold out. It's been crazy, guys. I mean, we've, for the first time, as far as I can remember, mind you, I was a member before I was part of the team here. There's very few whiskeys left at our website, smwsa.com. And it's just been extraordinary demand. I think, you know, a lot of us are at home turning to whiskey exploration as sort of an activity to bring some joy in our day-to-day quarantines. So yeah, right now, I guess apologies for the lack of variety. You know, our outturn last week was really crazy. We'll be coming back next week with a little mid-month outturn. We'll be doing a preview tasting next Monday night here on YouTube. But it's just been extraordinary. And I could tell you guys, if you can hold off a little bit too, after this, looking ahead, the next couple months are just going to be phenomenal. We're going to bring out some of our biggest outturns from the best selections. So again, stay with us. Thanks for hanging around. And yeah, lack of variety now, but I hope you guys enjoyed the last outturn, at least last week. Yeah, everyone's stuck at home buying whiskey. I guess there are worse things to be stuck with, you know? Okay, so let's move on. We're coming up at the 45-minute mark already. So we've just touched on the first one from the Highlands. Then we went down to Camel Town, which I mentioned earlier is becoming more of the in-demand region of Scotland. Just 3 distilleries, but really quality spirit. And now we're moving on to something that I think is the love or hate. And I'll just throw that out there. It's the love or hate style of whiskey. For me, actually, it was a hate at first and then became an ultimate love. So if this is not your thing, just stick around, just give it a try, keep going back to it. But it's one of the more polarizing experiences, I would say, in all of spirits to be had. And it's the peated Islay whiskey. So this is cask 53.310. Can you see this? Called Kippers and Sippers. 10 years old, from a refill hogshead, ex-bourbon. The last one we just had was from a hogshead. This is a refill. That one was recharred, though. This is just a straight sort of used cask, bottled at 60.7%, 10 years old. One of 275 bottles. So, and as you can see here, the green label, am I pointing at? The green label is our peated profile. We actually have 3 different peated profiles: lightly peated, peated, heavily peated. This is the classic peated. And Okay, right away, I just uncork this, and it's just like this waft of dense coastal peat smoke is just exploding from the glass. All right, let's actually. I keep doing these light pours. You know what? I like to taste a lot. I don't drink. I like to say I don't drink much, but I taste a lot. And a lot of times, I like to pour small glasses and taste a lot of things over the course of the evening to make up a normal pour. But I just want to go back for the sake of this. So lighter color right away. Just curious, anybody, are you guys into Islay or peated whiskey? Does anybody not like Islay at all? Don't be afraid to voice your opinion if it's not your thing. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but if it's not, I would just say give it a shot, and it might come around. But for me, this is just like it's an amazing spirit, and I can already nose it. So, oh man, Tom R says, I'm itching for another purchase. Tom, I think in the caption below, I put my personal Instagram if you guys want to reach out that way. Also, I think you have my email, Tom, but my email is ben@smwsa.com, SMWS, and then A for America.com. Shoot me an email if you guys are looking for recommendations on whiskey. Our whole member services team is also available if you call our team line to help you out with a recommendation. But yeah, there are a few up there right now, and there's still some really good ones that are up there, but we're always bringing more and more. So I'm seeing right now some comments kind of in response to just Tom says 53 Drool. That was my gateway to Islay. Yes, love Islay, love Pete and Islay whiskeys. Great read. Yes, Islay is great. I love Islay. Okay, Whiskey Untitled says you know me, which I think that means yes, love, absolutely love the Pete. Can't get enough of it. Andrews, yes sir, love Islay. Okay, Islay is my favorite region, says Joshua. Okay. All right. Took the cap off, and this was barbecue meat. Okay. Yeah. So I took that, uncorked the bottle right away. It was just so prevalent. So for me, it's undeniable. When it comes to nosing a whiskey like this, it's just a peat explosion. And it's dense, it's oily. There's just the smokes. It's, you can't see it, but it's almost as if you can sort of visualize the smoke protruding from the glass, clinging onto the nose hairs that I thought I trimmed the other day after my quarantine let myself go session. Anyway, I'll leave that to myself. But oily smoke, there's a bit of brine. I get like a smoked shellfish. Like there's meaty. I think it was thrown out there earlier. I get like a little bit of smoked ham maybe, but for me it's more on the shellfish. Could just be me. A bit of ash and maybe some like a lemon zest. It's like, it's such an oily aroma. It's funny because I'm not even tasting it, but you can sort of pick up the oily nature and the viscosity of it just on nose. It's phenomenal. Carrie Baldwin says, drinking my bottle 53.206, 18 year. Don't be jealous. Well, normally I would be jealous, but I don't know. I'm pretty into this one too, Carrie. Patrick Smith says, didn't get the coastal set, but tasting a 53.74, delight. All right, cheers to that, Patrick. Whiskey Objective says, I just nosed this one, and it takes me to a smoky back alley in the French Quarter. Interesting. I love traveling. I actually haven't been to New Orleans, which is a bit crazy. Is that in New Orleans, I presume, or is that French Quarter? I think is in New Orleans, right? Or that also could be Montreal. Anyway, I'm the whiskey master, not the geography master. But yeah, but it's got like a dirty characteristic to it. Gilbert says peat up front, sweet and fruity behind the peat. Whiskey Go Girl says would be great on oysters. Interesting, yeah. I get a lot of smoked seafood. Oh, it's just intoxicating, isn't it? Scott says, don't feel bad, Ben. I haven't showered in 3 weeks. All right. I don't feel bad. Donald says, to keep up with you cool kids, I'm enjoying a nice Bowmore while listening to Ben. Donald, I think that's equally cool. I don't think that's less cool. Jose says that I don't have any of the whiskeys you're tasting, so I'm going to pop open a 52.30. Very nice. Oily, medium mouthfeel. Okay, let's get to the mouthfeel. I'm going to actually take a sip of water here because talking, tasting, camera, there's a lot of distractions here. So now that I've wet my palate a little bit, before we go into I can just nose this one for an hour, really. Oh, okay. That's in time. So I should, as the masterclass that this is, I should probably mention, try not to talk immediately after tasting. Give it about 10 seconds. That's typically what I like to do. And just funny rule of thumb I've picked up a few years back, and it's really helped me, is when it comes to tasting, general rule of thumb is the smaller the taste, the more flavor, the bigger the taste, the more alcohol. Meaning if you just take a very, very small sip, you'll be able to pick up more of the flavor and you'll reduce the impact of the alcohol. But if you drink more of it, I mean, think of it, if you take a shot of alcohol and it knocks you back, you're just getting the alcohol. So when I taste it, I like to take just a very small taste at first, just coat the mouth, coat the whole palate rather, and just give it some time. And so, wow, for me, initially it was attacking the tongue. Like it's really aggressive. Like I got a bit of mezcal. Let me go back because I was talking that time. Let me do it one more time. It's smoky. It's almost like a hint of mezcal. It just came in and out. I don't know if you guys picked that up too. Oh, it's like fire. It's absolute fire. But I don't mean that in just this sort of like, oh, it's cool, oh, it's fire, which is what all the kids are saying now. But okay, it tastes like fire. A little olive juice for me. Oh, but said like lemon, like just like the brine of the lemon when you just not that you eat it, but I would just zest that. It's a bit bitter, but it's like a wave of citrus. I'm in a bit of like an industrial quality. Like it's medicinal a bit, maybe like some medical gauze. That's just my impression. What are you guys think picking up? Let me see this. Oily, meaty, good mouthfeel, oily smoke with some lemon zest. Okay, lemon zest as well. But peat is cleaner than Lefroy Ardbeg. Okay. Yeah, the Whiskey Objective confirmed that it is in fact in New Orleans. Thank you. Have not been, but there's also French Quarter in Charleston. Okay, well, we can have the French Quarter combo. I appreciate you guys humoring me on that one. But Whiskey Objective says decaying dumpster garbage. Interesting. That is quite the tasting notes, but I absolutely. Sweet behind the peat. Yeah, it is a bit sweet. And Kevin says, yes, the sweet and a peat, the perfect combo. I think so too. And I'm going to add some water to this one right away, just to cut down on the intensity and see if I can pick up more of the flavors. Okay. This one is easily my favorite. Sweet peat, oily, seafood like mussels over a fire. Oh, I'm getting hungry. I got to tell you, this is stirring up an appetite. Normally, when it comes to drinking or enjoying a dram of peated or smoky whiskey, you tend to do it after a meal because once you put peat on your palate, it's hard to really taste anything else. I mean, you can. It's just if it's in a tasting, you definitely want to do it at the end. But when it comes to eating dinner, typically I do it afterwards. But it's making me hungry, so like as a bit of an aperitif, I'm now craving some seafood, which is not on my quarantine menu, unfortunately. But I guess I'll just drink this instead. Palate is very oily, lemon pepper, salt, some clean ash, meaty bacon on the finish. Well, as an American, I gotta love bacon. Finish is long and satisfying. Smoke is there still. Wow. Okay. Lingering ash in the finish. Lemon for sure. Meaty grizzles. I'm kind of just going up and down. Cigar ash. Agreed on the mezcal. Lindsay says, yeah, I picked up a little bit of that. Lindsay says, does anyone not like this one and want to sell me their bottle? No, I think I'll keep mine. Sorry, Lindsay. But if anybody else is open to it, you're welcome to barter. Oh man, this is just so. So this is obviously, it's to me a classic representation of Islay whiskey in the modern era. Islay, a small island southwest of Scotland, known for producing smoky whiskey. It's not all they do, and in fact, it was not always the case that the smoky style, the peaty style, was their overall regional style. But today it is. Peat is funny. It's a funny thing. Peat is essentially bricks of turf, of the earth cut up and used as a fuel source. And essentially, what you'll do is when you malt barley to make whiskey, we won't get into the whole whiskey making masterclass. I'll save that for someone who actually knows what they're talking about. But when it comes to making whiskey, as I understand, is, obviously you malt barley, which is the key ingredient of the spirit. You mix it with water, and then to dry it out, you'll actually dry it by burning a kiln, creating heats. With peated whiskey, you'll take bricks of peat, which is sort of just dried, decomposed vegetal matter, and you put that on the kiln that smokes, and the smoke particles actually bond to the grain at a molecular level. So that then carries through into distillation. So the smoky nature from simply burning peat carries through into the actual spirit, which is what we smell and taste right here. And it's interesting because peat is not all the same. Depending on where you cut the peat from and the contents and the makeup of that peat, that will actually dictate the unique flavors of the whiskey. So Islay peat is very unique in that it's sort of off, just right off the sea. You have a little sort of like a briny note, like a lot of dead seaweed, I would assume, probably hundreds of years of dead shellfish. And don't quote me on the age of the peat bogs themselves, but you have all this dead sort of coastal and maritime matter inside the actual bricks of earth. And so when you burn that, that creates this aroma on top of what probably is a very coastal spirit to begin with, in terms of the water source being off the island. And so for me, you pick up a lot of the ocean. That's peat is really, really dense and medicinal. Jay Manley says, the finish lasts for days. Man, it's still going for me too. It's only been a minute, but it's so good. I just got the barbecue mussels. Right on, George. I picked up the mussels for sure. Kevin says, with water, the nose gets so much sweeter. Oatmeal raisin cookies are very nice. I think, I'm getting hungry officially. I love oatmeal raisin cookies. They says, with water, palate is now sweeter, oiliness toned down, peppers are coming up, olives are coming up in the palate and finish. Karen says, agreed, water opens it up a lot. Okay. So this is for me a classic representation of Islay. And it's funny when it comes to whiskey and maturation, aging, a lot of times you hear people say older is better. And for me, that's not always the case. And I think we've learned that these whiskeys are all different, but particularly with Islay whiskey, generally, a lot of people who enjoy Islay whiskey tend to prefer it at a younger age. And this being 10 years old, and I'll just print it here on the label here. This being 10 years old is sort of on par with a lot of the core whiskeys you see coming out of Islay distilleries. It's a good representation in which it's still young and punchy, really aggressive, and sort of wakes you up. And then also old enough where it's developed enough complexity that there's a lot, it's very thought-provoking. There's a lot going on there. Yeah, Islay shines younger. And Whiskey Objective says, I got olives on the nose with water. Oh, man. This one is dynamite, very complex and continuing to unfold. Yeah, for me, I have to say, after we end this, I'm going to enjoy going back sort of on my own, cut off some of the distractions maybe and dim the lights and spend a lot of my quarantine just really getting to know these, because this one, I think there's a lot going on. And when you get beyond the peat, you know what I'm going to do, actually? I'm going to add a little bit more water, because I think when you get beyond the peat, as I was saying, there's a lot more there. It's not just the smoke. It's sort of the malty characteristics, the brininess. And, oh, yeah, there's like a really good cereal grain note. That lemon zest is still prevalent. There's a lot going on when you sort of reduce the peat and put things a bit more in balance. Oh, yeah. Oh, even still, I'm adding more water. Even then, and you add water to taste, however you like. I like to add a little bit at a time and then go back. But for me, even this was strong. I've added water twice now, and it's still intense. I may have added too much water there. So, and that's the whole thing. You have to sort of go back and find your sweet spot. I like it when the alcohol is mellow enough where I can get into flavors, but the spirit still has the intensity to remind you when you're drinking it, hey, it is whiskey after all. So I wanted to kind of push the boundaries with water to see how it develops. And it's nice. I think I liked it with a little bit of water. I liked retaining that intensity. of the Islay spirit, but also cutting down the alcohol initially with just a few drops. That was my personal preference. So it's up to you guys. So overall, what do you think? I mean, so let's just do a quick recap. I know we're at the hour mark now and try to get you guys on your way. But Cask 26.132, we started. Just to remind you, this was Krupnik and Amaretti was the name. 9 years old, Highland. We picked up a little bit of salt, as I remember. It's off the Scottish coast in the northeast of Scotland. And then we moved down to Camel Town, southwest, the polar opposite geographically, 93.120, which is called Cocoa and Coal, 14 years old. And that was actually the oldest whiskey of the night. And that was the one, for me, at least, I struggled to find the coal note. It's very sweet up front. And then as I added some water and went back to it, it became more earthy and coastal. And there was a bit of brine and salt, sort of sea foam, actually, and like a saltiness to it. And then, of course, we just finished with 53.310 Kippers and Slipper, which is a classical representation of Islay. And I guess, so this is, as we call it, the Coastal Corian Masterclass. Corian meaning sort of the Scottish phrase of, snuggling indoors. Unfortunately, in this circumstance, it's not by choice. It's not that it's the dead of winter, although it did snow here in Chicago in April. But nonetheless, I think for most parts of the country, it's warm and people want to be outside. But nonetheless, we are coring in. And I think this is pretty fun. And so this is the coastal collection. Very, very different. I think all three were very different spirits. What do you guys think? Do you guys have any highlights? Anything stand out to you? I'm curious to know. For me, they were all very different. And I think maybe tomorrow or later this week, maybe this coming weekend, I'd like to go back and taste them maybe in a different order, because sometimes when you taste the first whiskey, your opinion is and your experience is unique simply because it's the first time your palate's becoming acclimatized with alcohol. It is a neurotoxin after all. And then as you move on, as you become acclimated, you're in a better position to taste more whiskeys, or more equipped rather. But I'd like to go back and hear what you guys think. Krupnik is the question that Joshua asked. Going back to this Krupnik and Amaretti, I apologize, I should have mentioned that earlier. So Krupnik, and it actually even says here on the label, it's a Lithuanian liqueur made from vodka with honey and spices. So that's interesting because I think we did pick up collectively. I know a lot of you guys saw that I saw in the comments. A lot of you guys picked up the honey and spices, and it was really, really spicy for me. Almost like a wintertime type of dram. I mean, I think it's subtle enough where it's good all year long, and like now it's if it were wine, they would say it's drinking quite well right now this year. This vintage is drinking quite well, but I think they'll really, as we go through the summer, it gets colder again. I think this is one I'll keep around and enjoy in the colder months, because I think that spice is really prevalent at that point. Anyway, so yeah, what do you guys think overall? So let me just address the comments before we go in. So great job as usual, Ben. Thank you. See you tonight, Jenna. Yes, so tomorrow we're going to pick up with our Highland Masterclass, and Jenna, who is the same person as Whiskey Go Girl, will be hosting that session with 3 different Highland whiskeys, taking a break on Thursday. And then our colleague Zach, who is also Zach, I see you in the chat box there, based in Florida. Jenna's out in LA, Zach's down in Orlando in Florida, and he's going to be hosting the Speyside Masterclass, 3 whiskeys on Friday evening. So that'll be a nice segue into the weekend, I think. Hope this is a nice break from your Tuesday. And otherwise, I would say just overall, let us know what you guys think about this. Our goal really is to bring the society tasting experience to your home as best as we can. We're all going through kind of a unique, challenging time right now, and we're all in this together. Personally, I've been really fortunate to be able to turn to the society and really just whiskey, and more so the community, and to just turn to each other and find some positive and a source of joy. And probably what's not the easiest time for all of us. So this has been fun. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a great time. It's actually pretty low key. So right. I hope you guys learned something. As I mentioned earlier, I've included my personal Instagram. Follow me if you'd like. Shoot me a message there. I'm pretty responsive. Also shoot me an email, ben@smwsa. It's SMWS, Scotch Malt Whiskey Society, and then A for America.com. And we'll be doing more of these, and we'll be coming back to you with more other live streams with different types of content soon. So signing off. Sanjava.